The dynamic duo known as the Holy Brothers, Marvin Etzioni and OG Discograffiti Soldier of Sound Willie Aaron, have a new album out called High in My Balloon. This remarkable album is the triumphant result of the two friends turning to music for comfort and strength after Marvin's bout with leukemia and Willie was forced to deal with the loss of his wife of 25 years to cancer. Americana Highways described it as like Brian Wilson snuck into the studio, fired up the machines, and did some work on some of the tracks not locked up. Really, the harmonies, basic tracks, songwriting, and lots of other odds and ends are that momentous. If you love the harmonies and sonic experimentation of Bookends era Simon & Garfunkel, The Beach Boys, and Beck's Circa Sea Change, you owe it to yourself to dig into the musical wonders of High in My Balloon by the Holy Brothers, available right now on Regional Records. The second single from Future Prophet Records is here. Birthday Girl presents Never the Sound, available right now on Future Prophet Records. That's Future, Prophet, records.com. Order now. One last thing about the actual album. It really is modeled on that live set, laying down in the studio kind of thing, where they're able to do it, I'm sure, very comfortably over the course of 4 days. But honestly, the best thing about this record for me is it does not feel like a club set. This feels like a record that you could walk around in that sound world. And so kudos to Arthur and the guys for being able to not just, have their club set memorized and have the vibe so beautifully laid out and, know it like the back of their hand, but to actually be able to create that kind of atmosphere in that limited amount of time.
Right. There's a couple of moments where they go off, like Sign DC is a good example, where it's like that's more of a studio creation a little bit. And like the Brian McLean song, Mushroom Clouds as well. But there's a few moments where they become a little bit more of a studio band, and it does make the record feel a little bit more fleshed out, like a full record and not just their live set. Very consistent for what it is, which is, the band's debut. Very accomplished for what it is.
Welcome to Discograffiti, the deep dive podcast for music obsessives that gives maniacs like you and me the chance to connect with a brotherhood obsessed with rating the entire discography of every single artist and band that ever mattered. I'm your host, Dave Gebroe, and when I was a kid, I thought I loved music. But no, that was only the beginning. I almost lost my life, and in the process, it made music a top priority in a way I'd thought was completely unimaginable. I quit my job, went all in on Discograffiti, and never looked back. And so, with 3 new episodes each week, you're going to gain a comprehensive knowledge of an act's history and output in the time it takes to listen to one album. Each new guest swings a hard left into an area you either had no idea you needed to know about, or know all about and can't believe you're not alone out there. And in this episode, we'll be turning our spray cans on love! Psst, along with our special guest, Joe Kennedy. This episode is part of a series called 7 and 7 and 7 is, the definitive 21-episode story of Arthur Lee and Love, which I've consciously crafted to act as the ultimate repository of fact and opinion on one of the greatest bands to ever walk the face of the earth, the almighty Love. It includes 13 episodes heralding the return of Discograffiti host OG Joe Kennedy, 6 episodes from a 4.5-hour interview with OG Love mainstay Johnny Echols, and 2 episodes from a 2.5-hour interview with the members of Baby Lemonade, who've served as Love now for coming up on 35 years. This is part 3, covering Love's self-titled debut Elektra LP, the background story, the making of the record, and a song-by-song overview. Here are just a few of the many things that Joe discusses with Discograffiti in this podcast. The first man to jump ship from Love and the spectacular success he surprisingly wound up achieving. Why Don Conca needed replacing, and the psychological dynamic set in place with Snoopy Fisterer's arrival in the band. The group's Elektra contract, which set a new standard for legal sloppiness. The heated songwriting rivalry set in place between Arthur Lee and Brian McLean, how Love's version of My Little Red Book wound up veering off from Burt Bacharach's intended chord sequence, and an in-depth deep dive on every song off Love. Coming up, we've got an incredible deep dive series on Jefferson Airplane and a hell of a lot more, so don't miss out. Open up your listening app right now and subscribe. For over 4 years now, Discograffiti's Friday episodes have been completely free, and it's been my pleasure. But for a variety of reasons, Discograffiti's now moved to the subscription-based Patreon as our primary platform. Moving forward, our public stream will feature a teaser of the Friday episode and a Tuesday teaser of the bonus episode, and that's all. But here's the good news. Only $5 a month will get you the weekly Friday podcast to which you become accustomed. That's it. It's a no-brainer at just $1 an episode. And just that little bit will be what's required to help the show survive. To sweeten the pot, you'll also get regular installments of the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast. That's Rudy Fishman's podcast within a podcast featuring our Patreon members as guests. You'll also get access to over 100 back episodes of that show. The $10 Lieutenant tier gets you all that, plus access to half of the Patreon archive. That's hundreds of additional episodes, plus copies of my personal show notes, which include invaluable research, star ratings, and reviews. But the $20 major tier is the place to be, unless you can support the show on even higher tiers, which, if you can afford it, offers substantial perks, including advertising on the show and selecting the guests and artists I cover. With the major tier and above, you get it all. The Monday bonus episodes, aka the best stuff, the Friday show, the Soldiers of Sound podcast, plus access to the entire archive. That's many hundreds of Patreon episodes, an absolutely endless barrage of music entertainment, including 50 episodes of The Private Press with Paul Major, Rock Cousteau, Queasy Listening, and so much more. So support the podcast that's been supporting you for years. Discograffiti's calling, and it needs you, so don't risk feeling guilty by not giving. But enough of me yapping. Go on, subscribe now. Visit patreon.com/discograffiti and find the tier that's right for you. And away we go then! Phase 1, even their later stuff prefers their early stuff, 1965 to 1968. Having outgrown the Brave New World in October 1965, Love moved over to another spot off the Sunset Strip, Beto Lito's backstage. It was there, a tiny hole-in-the-wall spot tucked away on a cul-de-sac called Cosmo's Alley, where Lee first truly fulfilled his promise. The audience there was often sprinkled with celebrities. You might find Sal Mineo hanging out there, Mick Jagger, Brian Jones, Bob Dylan, Jimi Hendrix, anyone who was anyone was hanging out there, and this is when they really started coming into their own.
You see how how compacted the timeline is, because October 1965 is where they start the Beto Lito's residency, and by January 66 they have their record deal and they're making the first album at Sunset Sound.
Yeah.
3 months later.
Love would almost always open their shows with a version of Howlin' Wolf's Smokestack Lightnin', which would stretch out into a long improvised jam, of which Arthur Lee later said, quote, "It would go into a lot of jazz feelings like John Coltrane. It could get really far out, expressing what the person playing was feeling in the song. With a steady beat going, we used to improvise, everyone changing the music to what he wanted, but somehow making it fit with what the others were playing. We'd play that song until it hypnotized the audience."
Another interesting little thing about Beto Lito's is that, he's talking about Coltrane and jazz and going in that direction. Around the corner was the kind of hippest jazz club in LA. It was called Shelley's Manhole, and they had shows a lot of times same nights that Love was at Beto Lito's. They'd have like Miles and John Coltrane and all the kind of leading figures in jazz at the time. It was one of the hot spots that hosted the big headliner A-list jazzers at the time, right around the corner. That club, I think, is still, all the buildings are still there. So if you walk around that area, I've done this before where I've been like, okay, that's Beto Lito's and that's where Shelley's was, and Sound Factory's right there. It's all right in the same, you could throw a ball and hit all three of them from standing in the corner. Yeah.
Beto Lito's looms really large in Love lore, and it was there in the really small brick-walled enclave that Love Sound, which Brian McLean later very aptly described as a black version of folk rock, came together. By this time, the group had a really clear dynamic. Arthur Lee was the unquestioned leader and frontman. He'd already become a pioneer in the LA freak scene, often making a statement by wearing multicolored glasses that were a step beyond the freakiness of Roger McGuinn, and a boot on one foot with a shoe on the other. truly one step beyond, because he's black and already looking freakier than McGuinn. People kind of already barely knew how to react to him. He wrote most of the band's original music, and that said, there's always been some debate over exactly who contributed what to the arrangements of certain songs and whether those contributors should be considered co-writers. And then on either side of him, his two lieutenants. You have Johnny Echols, a wildly talented blues and jazz guitarist, and incredibly handsome. I mean, Arthur's voice may have been often compared to Johnny Mathis, but Johnny actually looked like the guy. And those in the know regard the man as Love's secret weapon, the Keith Richards to Lee's Jagger. And then there was Lee's number two man, Brian McLean, the blonde surfer boy with a completely different look, who played chiming, jangly guitar and wrote tender ballads about cotton candy and carnivals and knew everybody on the scene. Behind them, you had a rhythm section who were as good as any around, but for different reasons would soon split from the group. The first to go was John Fleckenstein, who quit the band because he had an opportunity to join the Cameraman's Guild and enter the film industry. He would later briefly play bass with the Standells, including on their garage rock classic Riot on Sunset Strip. For the most part, though, he worked in film on movies like Close Encounters and E.T., movies like that.
One of those rare circumstances where a guy leaves a great rock band before they get big, and it turns out it actually panned out okay for him. Turns out it actually worked out probably in his favor.
Yeah, I'd say. So his replacement was Ken Forsey, who had previously played bass with a latter-era lineup of the Surfaris.
So surprisingly, the very first recordings credited to Love didn't actually feature Arthur Lee. They had a friend named Vince Flaherty, who occasionally sat in with them on vocals and harmonica. Like many people in the LA scene, Flaherty had been a child actor and was now pursuing music, and he convinced the four instrumentalists from Love to back him on some demos in the fall of '65. These tracks are important because they're the only existing studio recordings that featured Don Conca on drums. Conca was considered one of the best drummers around at the time. People often compared his playing to that of Buddy Rich. Problem was, Conca was using heroin. This would become a problem for almost every member of the band, but at this point they were only smoking weed and experimenting with psychedelics, whereas Conca was a full-blown heroin addict. And as heroin addicts never think will happen, Don inevitably started missing work.
Increasingly, bassist Ken Forsey's flatmate started getting called on to fill in with the group. That was Albin Pfisterer, who went by the name Snoopy. He was younger than the other band members and was actually a trained keyboard player who could also handle the drums fairly well. However, he was no Don Conca, and both Echols and McLean disliked him. McLean later said, quote, "I didn't feel he was homogenous with what we were doing. He seemed like this straight kid. He wasn't hip and didn't look right." While Pfisterer said, quote, "I didn't like Brian and the feeling was mutual. He mistreated me more than any of them. And he was really nasty to me. He thought I was square and he was hip, and I wasn't the drummer he wanted. Also, Arthur liked me."
You look at the pictures, and Snoopy always looks kind of sad and pissed off.
Well, there's a reason for that. There is a reason for that. So the dynamic that was set in place when Snoopy came on board, and for a long time as well, was Don is our drummer. Even though he's apparently not coming back, we are holding out hope that Don is coming back, because apparently Don was this insane talent, and so they didn't want to give up the ghost on Don, even way past the point at which it was obviously not happening anymore. So when Don didn't turn up for the sessions for the group's first album, Snoopy ended up on that too, although very appropriately, there were no drums at all on one of the album's highlights, Signed DC, which was a rewrite of House of the Rising Sun with lyrics about Don Conca's heroin addiction. I never actually consciously realized that was, I knew it was about Conca, but then thinking that this is a song about a drummer that has no drums in it, by its very absence, makes it kind of genius.
It's kind of meta,
yeah.
But it's kind of weird, I guess, maybe that arrangement where Snoopy is just a sort of a placeholder. Maybe that's why they couldn't find a better drummer. It seems like, I mean, no knock on Snoopy. He plays pretty nice drums. He's have a little bit of a garage-y kind of feel. He's not a super slick drummer by any means.
Keep in mind, he played on 7 and 7 Is. This guy was capable of greatness.
Yeah, although it took him all day to get the take, apparently. But seems a little weird that being so successful and Los Angeles being a town full of musicians that they couldn't find a better drummer drummer than Snoopy, or at least someone who was more appealing to everybody in the band and not just Arthur. But maybe that's what it was. It was the fact that the seat was just always looked at as sort of temporary. Snoopy was almost not treated as a full member of the band.
Not almost. He was not treated as a full member because Snoopy was, well, we'll get to this later, but he's not in the contract for that first record.
Right.
He's paid as a session guy, basically. He's the only one who is not on the contract. Don Conca is on the contract. Don didn't sign the contract. To Don, he wasn't even in the band anymore. So on January 24th, 1966, 3 weeks after signing the contract with Elektra, Love entered Hollywood's Sunset Sound Recorders to begin cutting their debut. All right, that about does it. To hear the full episode, just visit patreon.com/discograffiti and either subscribe as a private or higher, or just purchase it as a one-off. If you are a fan of the show, please do one of those two to help ensure Discograffiti's continued existence. Stay tuned, because next week brings upon us episodes 4 and 5 of 7 and 7 and 7 is the definitive 21-episode story of Arthur Lee and Love. It's Da Capo week. Okay, here's the week up ahead. This Sunday, our weekly show within a show, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast, drops for our Patreon's private tier. These are real people with talent and a burning fire deep inside, just like you and I. Then, come Tuesday, the major tier gets a very special treat. Tuesday's bonus episode is part 5 of our 7 and 7 and 7 is Love series. It's the Johnny Echols interview about Love's classic second LP, Da Capo. There will be a very short sneak peek running publicly for free on Tuesday morning, but the entirety of the show will only be accessible on the major tier of our Patreon. A heartfelt Discograffiti thanks goes out to my beautiful son Mason, Joe Kennedy, Willie Aaron, Johnny Echols, Mike Randall, Rusty Squeezebox, David Green, Rudy Fishman, Becky Boyd, my mom, my dad, my incredibly loyal fans, and especially the entire Patreon community, the Soldiers of Sound. I love every last one of you, and this show would not exist without you, my friends. Speaking of friends, it's high time for some new ones. They're in our Facebook group, Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound. That's the best way to find out what's coming up on the show, but there's a hell of a lot more. You get recaps of the day in music history, the ability to pitch questions to guests, polls that put you in the driver's seat on guest and band decisions, and access to a thriving creative hub if you're looking for a collaborator. So make sure you don't miss out. You can find the link to the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound Facebook page right there in the show notes. And if you don't mess with the Zuck, no sweat. Just email me at info@discograffiti.com and I'll keep you in the loop. So now that it's done and you want more, another way to dive even deeper into the amniotically dark and cozy psychedelic underworld of the 60s and 70s is to leap headfirst into our Spirit series. That's episodes 241 to 249. The Lenny Waronker interview, that's 244 and 245. Our ongoing Graham Nash interview in which he talks about everything he's ever done. Our 13-episode Moby Grape series featuring interviews with Peter Lewis, Don Stevenson, and Bob Mosley. That's episodes 208 to 214. The Beatles' Pete Best. That's episode 188. Our free design interview with all the Dedrick siblings. That's 160 to 162. Our Mamas and Papas series featuring my 16-hour Michelle Phillips interview, which she says is the best interview she's ever done. That's episodes 141 to 159. My 13-hour interview with Terry Kirkman and Jules Alexander about everything the association ever did. That's 109 to 113. My interview with Vashti Bunyan about her life and everything she's ever recorded, that's 103 to 104. My interview with Os Mutants Sergio Diaz, that's 86 and 87. Lou Barlow on the Zombies, that's 59 and 60. Foxygen's Jonathan Rado on Todd Rundgren, that's 37 and 40. Anthony Fantano on the Velvet Underground, that's 32 and 33. Bob Forrest on the band, that's 25 and 27. Andrew Sandoval on the Monkees, that's 22 and 23. Don Randy on David Axelrod, that's episode 17. And Pink Floyd is 1 and 2. And of course, be sure to mark your calendars, because next Friday, March 27th, we're coming at you with a sweet, sweet deep dive on Love's Da Capo. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss it. And so, From now till then, don't let our youth go to waste, lads and ladies. It's Discograffiti!